January 24th is the UN International Day of Education. This year, the focus is peace and development. Peace and development are not separate to the issue of climate change and women and girls. Sue Lee from the Zonta Club of Melbourne-on-Yarra has taught in Australia, in city schools and remote Indigenous schools. Also in Nepal and Timor-Leste, developing countries, with wide range of students to engage in successful learning. Sue is also a career counselor with experience across schools, university, and the government sector. How students are educated impacts strongly on how they view their future options and community responsibilities. Today, teaching how to think is essential to solving problems of the future. Viewing education as a lifelong process allows us to cope with change and new ideas. Teaching women and girls pays dividend for communities and our countries in terms of peace, positive climate action, and development. Sue will talk about the importance of education for the individuals and society, particularly in terms of climate action and understanding the impacts of climate change on women and girls today. Sue, please educate us.
Thank you. I'll just share screen. So as the introduction said, my name's Sue Lees from the Zonta Club of Melbourne-on-Yarra. And today, this presentation is really from my personal view, my personal teaching experience. And I think that people from other countries particularly may have some different and interesting ideas to add to it later on. So the education of girls supports peace, development, and acting on climate issues. And this is perhaps mainly a view from Australia, but thrown in with some of my experience overseas and around Australia. So as we just said, the focus for 2024 International Day of Education is peace and development. And we need that so much. And that's just a few of the problems for women around the world at the moment, unfortunately. There's some things we all know pretty much. We know that women and war is a pretty terrible situation. So that in the UN Women on December the 20th of last year, said that 2/3 of those displaced and killed in Gaza were women and girls. As well, women were suffering from increased rape, other sexual violence, increased unwanted pregnancies, and sexually transmitted diseases. And it really doesn't matter which side you favour in any war, it is always the same story for women. Post-war, women we know bear the brunt of secondary and lasting effects of war, insecurity, displacement, and disrupted productive and reproductive and healthcare, and that's actually really important for women. Hold on. My presentation is just frozen. Okay. We know that war increases the problems of climate change. That's fairly obvious in many ways. War increases carbon emissions, mechanised equipment uses fossil fuels, something perhaps we don't think about a lot. Just destruction of the environment is very clear. Chemicals remaining as a toxic legacy is something that's actually quite common, and countries like Ukraine have been devastated. We know that women are good for development. We're all fairly aware of that. The IMF, which is the International Monetary Fund, says that empowering women is smart economics, that women's increased economic participation speeds up development, helps overcome poverty, reduces inequalities, and very importantly, improves children's nutrition, health, and school attendance. And we know as mothers and as teachers, the effect on children is just really important. But sometimes what we perhaps don't think about quite as much is that investing in female education is not only a driver for peace and development, but it's also a driver for climate action and climate leadership. So it's actually been looked at and found that for developing countries, women's empowerment has been linked to better environmental outcomes, stricter climate change policies, smaller climate footprint, more protected land, more support for international environmental treaties, increased community resistance to natural disasters. And some of those things we talked about in what Zonta Says Now covered last year. But the picture I have here is actually one of my friends who's from the Seychelles, who has been involved in a successful campaign to save wetlands there. And that's actually been really important for their community. Something else that we do know, and we've probably all heard this, educate a girl, change the world. But behind slogans and words are really important actions. So what I have found over the years, and a lot of my experience has been educating girls. I've also worked in a boys' school and taught many boys over the years. But particularly when I've worked in developing countries, educating a girl, and I'll show you some examples later on, don't just change her world or even her family's world, which can be quite significant for them, but it can change the whole world. And this is something that I have to say that I have particularly found is that girls understand concepts of community interest and responsibility earlier than boys. That doesn't mean that boys can't or that some boys do it very well, but as a general principle, when there's urgency now to have peace, development, act on climate issues, I actually do believe that educating girls and women well will be our best investment, and that well is actually very important. So as I said, the boys are important, but when you look at education, boys do have a higher dropout rate. They repeat grades more, they have more difficulty learning and becoming motivated. Girls find it harder to access countries, particularly in places like Afghanistan, but they make the most of their opportunities when they do have it. So addressing boys' disengagement from and disadvantage in education will and could be transformative in promoting gender equality. We've certainly it's really important, but we know already it's going to take quite a while to do. Another really important thing about learning now and about education, and pretty much around the world, is that education is seen increasingly as lifelong learning. And that's a really important concept. And it's a really important concept when we're trying to talk about things like climate education. And lifelong learning, what's really important about it is that it's okay for you to admit that you don't know. Be prepared to find out. Lifelong learning, again, and this is from my perspective as an older person now, is that it can be a challenge, particularly for older people, because a lot of older people haven't really had that concept of lifelong learning. They haven't really engaged in learning for quite a long time. They haven't really been exposed to good, accurate information about climate, unfortunately. And so in Australia, we have an organisation called U3A, and I know that's in England. I'm not sure if it's in America, but it's University of the Third Age. And so there is a very big emphasis on continuing education there. But the interesting thing about U3A is the majority of members are female. Females, they are really keen to keep learning. So if education is to be a good long-term investment with increasing returns for the individual and for society, if it is to be a powerful force in the face of the escalation of climate problems, then how do we educate is actually really important. And I think the first thing about education, and that I've particularly in developing countries, is that we need to give agency to people, to women in particular, not fear. Gone are the days where students were scared of school or people were scared of learning. Fear immobilises, it stops us taking action. We want to raise people who are prepared to try, who really want to take action. We very much need to respect new ideas and thoughts, and this is where your lifelong learning is important. Importantly, we need to teach concepts. We need to teach how to understand more than facts and figures. So when I've been doing some teaching in Timor-Leste, the government schools, they could teach, and some of them did teach, up to 27 subjects, and they were all fact subjects. So there's only one opportunity to learn, one way to learn, and education's a lot more interesting than that these days. One of the primary things about learning now is that we need to welcome problems. We need to welcome the opportunity to problem solve. And this is what we're doing in schools now, showing students that to accept that not only there may be a problem to solve, but there may be many possible solutions to solving the problem. There is not necessarily just one right way or one answer to everything. And another thing that we're really concentrating these days is accept that small changes can be important and do add to the big picture. So whether you start your environmental group at school and they go down, as I did many years ago, go down to the local river and do testing, which in fact helps an area to be saved and made into a beautiful park. And that really gave us a lot of impetus to what else could we do? We've done something small, but it was really important to us, to the community. And from that, the interest grew, and lots of people went on to do more work in the environment sphere. So in Australia, we have a group called 1 Million Women. And 1 Million Women has basically worked on the idea of trying to get women to take small, positive climate action in their own lives, in their own home. And they've reached out now to over 1 million women. And so it's a great group, and it's a really important group, and Carol particularly has been quite involved in that group. We need to think very creatively and allow students to think creatively. They're brilliant at it. But we actually also need to teach a proper problem-solving process. So the human society, we have the benefit of past learning, what people have built up. We can actually work out a problem-solving process. And teaching students to think, not what to think, really does empower young people to create a better tomorrow. And there's an international program called Future Problem Solving, and I know that is in America too, and it's a fantastic program. And it teaches an actual 6-step problem-solving process, which can be applied to all sorts of situations in the real world, in all types of careers when you're working in local and global communities to solve problems, as well as future societies. So the process teaches critical and creative thinking, problem solving and decision making. And that critical thinking is just huge. And decision making, proper decision making, is so important. So because I'm a careers counsellor also, one of my big jobs over the years has been helping students to choose university courses, tertiary courses, careers that are appropriate to them. And this is an example of Monash University in Melbourne now, and one of the courses that they have developed, which I have had students go to and love, and it's called a Bachelor of Science Advanced Global Challenges. And the information about the course says that it's real-world problem solving, and it is. The summit of your experiences in the course will be a year-long project during which you will work with your peers and in partnership with an external organisation to tackle an issue of real global significance. And students do. It's a very important way to introduce them how to work with problems in the world. Another thing about problems is the fact that you're not necessarily going to win the first time round, you're not going to solve them the first time round. Sometimes you've got to keep coming back. So Anjali Sharma is a current university student in Australia. A couple of years ago, as a Year 12 school student, she was the lead litigant in Sharma and others versus the Environment Minister. It was a class action claiming that the federal Environment Minister had a duty of care to protect young people from the future harms of climate change. It was a very significant case. They didn't actually win, but now they're going about it another way. They've come back. They've enlisted the support of one very, very good male senator in Australia, and a number of female politicians who we call the Teals, who are independents, and they're working with them to try to create some legislation and get it passed. And they've got a good chance. If they don't, they'll come back again, I'm sure. The other thing that's really important with education and problem solving is that we need to use other people who have like interests and abilities, use peers and mentors. So the picture that I have here is from some of my Indigenous work, and it's an island called Milingimbi, which is off the north coast of Australia, and there's another island up there I've also worked at called the Tiwi Islands, and they are flat, totally flat. Both of them, that is the level above the sea where the students are standing for the whole island. So the schools have been really concerned about climate change and trying to tell the community, trying to tell the students about it, but we weren't doing very well. They weren't really engaged. But then an Australian footballer visited the islands, and his job he was given was actually to teach the students about climate change. And that was really significant. So football's huge in Indigenous, what we call Australian rules football is huge in Indigenous communities. And he actually got through to them where we couldn't, but also because he actually came from the islands himself. And the students said, we know him, we understand, he is one of us. And so that engagement was immediate, and we found that that knowledge and interest lasted. So it's identifying others who are actually very useful at teaching as well. So another thing that I've found over the years is that it is really important to give people recognition for the work that they do, particularly women. In many ways, women and girls don't seek recognition. And we have to actually provide opportunities and encourage them to actually do that. And in doing that, other women, other girls, get the idea that it's not only okay to do something, it's okay to stand up and talk about it so that others know what you've done. And so what Zonta does here in this arena is actually already very useful. So you've got young women in public affairs, and I look after that for our club. And the women, the girls who we've had the last few years, they've all had a really strong climate interest, as well as the many other wonderful things they do. And Phoebe Burke here was one of the international winners last year. Women in STEM, that's a really important one for girls and women now too, because we know there's brilliant women out there and they do in STEM with climate action is really important. And then Women Taking Climate Action is currently a District 23 award. And we have discovered over about the last 3 or 4 years some amazing women who are working in the climate action space in Australia. And here is Dr. Anne Polina, who was one of our winners this year, and she's been involved in the Kimberley region, which is in the north of Australia. The other thing, and I noticed we have somebody from Madagascar, which is wonderful today, support female climate change projects. We can all do a bit of that. We can tell people about them again, because like in Madagascar, I was reading about the program, and deforestation has impacted approximately 94% of Madagascar's previously forested lands. I mean, that is just huge. And so Zonta, working with UNICEF, enables children, particularly girls, to live and learn in a safe and inclusive environment, and empowers them to take actions to change and build climate-resistant communities. So they're actually learning about climate change. So it's well worth supporting Zonta there. So another thing that I have, this is another personal comment, but I have seen that women, girls, are very interested in the idea of education as part of a social contract. So it's for the community, it's about the community. They see education as a responsibility, a way of navigating change for themselves and for society. They're interested in tackling the big questions that we've got at the moment, like how do we move from a society economy that values consumption and use of resources as the drivers of growth to a society and economy that values sustainability, social, economic and environmental justice, which we're all trying to work towards. It's a huge question. Women are up for it. And so what is success really? If you try to teach this way, if you try to concentrate on women and girls. So one of the schools I worked at in Timor-Leste was actually a very good international school, Dili International School. And Monique was from a very, very, very poor Timor-Leste family. So Timor-Leste is one of the very poorest nations in the world, and the people who are poor there are really poor. And she managed to get a scholarship to Dili International School, and actually another school in Australia gave a scholarship to the school. So for years 11 and 12, so she came to that school, had to actually learn in English and hadn't learned in English before that, but she did that as well. She went into a school that valued problem solving and initiative. It's an international baccalaureate school as well. So her education was totally different from the 27 subjects she'd done rote learning in a local school. So she worked so hard. She was just incredible. And she got a scholarship eventually to New Zealand to study agriculture and environmental science. And her whole idea always was she was coming back to work for Timor-Leste. So now she works in an NGO. She's supporting farmers. She's trying to teach them about the environment. She's trying to teach them sustainable practices in their farming. But in her spare time, she's actually started her own community centre so that she's teaching students, young children, so with the whole idea that eventually they can get to where she is and her country can improve. Then in Nepal, we had a big focus on girls' education where I was working in the hill country. And we found one of the big things we did was we introduced computers. We actually got the internet to them. And then we focused on girls. We said the girls actually are the ones who are going to have the first opportunity to learn all this. And so the boys were basically beating the doors down while we taught the girls, and then they had their opportunity. But what we found was that those girls, they started to have dreams of what they wanted to do in their life, how they wanted to help their community. Some of them went off to university, and we found, because we've been involved in the Nepal project for a number of years, that they come back, they actually work in their community, even in their holidays. They were coming back to actually do programs with the women, teach the women how to use stoves more environmentally and things like that to cook. So we had really created a generation of leaders in the community and opened their own world. So in the developed countries, some of our girls are way ahead. They're doing amazing work in the climate area. So for the District 23 talk last year, we had one of my past students, Amy Steele, and Amy is currently the head of office and global subject lead for climate risk and adaptation at NG Impact, which is a large French international company that's working in Australia as well, particularly in the mining sector, teaching them how to be more environmental. She's amazingly passionate about climate change, reducing emissions to protect the health of ecosystems and human beings. And so developing countries, we create wonderful women by doing this type of problem solving education. We do it in developed countries as well. So basically, I suppose what I'm trying to say, and I know that I'm teaching to those who know a lot anyway, but I'm hoping that maybe I've just given you a few ideas that you can go away and talk to people about it, because word of mouth is actually still really important in spreading our message. So to educate women and girls well and save the world, and that well is really important because it does support peace, development, the UN education principles. In a climate emergency, which is what we do have now, we've all been trying to say, no, it's not that bad, but we do have to face it is a climate emergency. If we give agency to girls, give them the tools, give them good education, I think women and girls are going to be where we're going to actually get the most value for our efforts. So thank you very much, everybody, and I'll stop sharing.